Okay, children, in this part of the lesson, we are going to talk about the different sculptures and what could be the meaning of these sculptures. So, we have seen that many sculptures were removed from the stupa and taken to different place because they found this they found the sculptures beautiful and valuable and wanted to keep them for themselves. But later, historians tried to understand the history related with the sculpture. One such sculpture we are going to discuss, children. This is, if you see this picture page number 99. This picture, your figure 4.3, at first sight, if you look at the sculpture, it seems it is about a rural life with thatched huts and tree. So you see that maybe it's just a simple rural life. But when art historians tried to understand, they found actually the sculpture at Sanchi identified as the scene from Vesantara Jataka, and this is a story about a generous prince who gave everything to Brahmana and went to live in the forest with his wife and children. So this is what your this picture of 4.3 depicts. So this is the story of actually the prince. But if you just look at this sculpture, it seems like the ordinary rural life. And we'll be talking about the different symbols which were used in sculptures. And according to Buddhist tradition, they say that Buddha sometimes was shown with some of the symbols. Like we have the symbol like empty seat. So you can see the children in the picture, empty seat. And in this empty seat symbolize the meditation of Buddha. Sometime stupa was also meant to represent the Mahaparinirvana. That means when Buddha got the enlightenment. Another symbol here we see, children, the symbol of will, and this stood for the first sermon of Buddha, which was delivered at Sarnath. So this is how we see in the sculptures different symbols were used to make people understand about the different story of life of Buddha. And the most popular is about this sculpture. And sculpture at Sanchi was not directly inspired. This sculpture is not directly inspired from Buddhist idea. So initially historians could not understand what is this lady all about. So scholars were a bit confused, but later after examining other tradition, they realized that it could be the representation of what is been described in Sanskrit, that is your Salavanjanika. So she is supposed to be considered as a lady luck, and whatever she touched, and that tree to flower and bear the fruits. So that means she was a lady luck. So it is believed that she was considered as auspicious symbol. And Salavanjanika motif suggests that many people who turned to Buddhism, their life became beautiful, their life became meaningful. Because we have already seen, children, according to the Brahminical tradition, they used to believe in casteism, people were discriminated. But when they became Buddhist, there was no discrimination, everyone were treated equally. So they became much more happier and their life became much more meaningful. So this is how we see children. Different symbols were used to describe the story of Buddhism. And next symbol we'll see, like in some jatakas they talk about the different animals, and animals were also often used as a symbol of the human attributes. Like they talk about the elephant, and elephant signify strength and wisdom. So there is this symbol out here. This is been described as the woman surrounded by lotus and elephant. Just now we saw it in the figure 4.19, and it is believed that maybe this figure was of Buddha's mother Maya, and others think that maybe she is the popular goddess Gaja Lakshmi. So children, we have seen that different symbols were used in the sculptures of stupas, and it has different meaning. So we talked in this topic mainly about the sculptures and the different story related with the sculptures. Children, now we'll talk about the new religious tradition. So we have seen by the 1st century CE, there is a evidence of the changes in Buddhist idea and practice. Earlier, they used to consider Buddha as the human, and early Buddhist teaching had given importance to the self-effort in achieving nirvana. Children, we talked about nirvana, which means moksha. And in this form of Buddhism, they regarded Buddha as human. But slowly and gradually, the concept of bodhisattva also developed. And bodhisattvas were perceived as a deep, compassionate humans who accumulated merit through their efforts, but use this not to attain nirvana, but to help others. So this means people with their merit, they get nirvana, but they use this to help the others. So they started worshipping Buddha and Bodhisattva in the form of God. So this new group of Buddhism is known as Mahayana. They are also known as Greater Vehicle, in which they started worshipping Buddha as God. And the earlier form of Buddhism was known as Hinyan, or the lesser vehicle. So this is how we see that in the earlier form of Buddhism, Buddha was regarded as a teacher, as a human. But from the time of the 1st century CE, we have seen there was a change, and they started emphasizing Buddha as a savior, and they started worshipping Buddha in the form of God. And in the same way, we also see the growth of Puranic Hinduism. And this notion of the savior was not just unique in Buddhism. We also find this idea being developed in the different ways within the tradition that we consider as a part of Hinduism. So now in the Puranic Hinduism, they started emphasizing on one particular god. Like they started worshipping Vishnu, and they were known as Vaishnavism. And another important god they talk about was Shiva, and the followers were known as Saivism. And in this, they started worshipping their chosen deity, and the bond between the devotee and the god was visualized as one of the love and devotion, or bhakti. So they started teaching in a simpler form. They started saying that there is a bonding between the god and the human as a devotee, and we see this is called the bhakti. So in the form of Saivism, they started considering that whenever there is evil in the earth, whenever people are having problem, whenever the world is threatened by the disorder and destruction, God will always come to save the world. So they started believing in incarnation or avatar. So they started believing in the different avatar, and they started recognizing the God in the form of different avatar. Like we see the picture out here, children. This is the Varaha or the Vor avatar of Vishnu, rescuing. He's trying to rescue the earth goddess in the 6th century. This is in Karnataka. And not only that, they also started symbolizing God with different symbols, like Shiva was symbolized by Linga, and similarly we have different symbols used, as well as headdresses, ornaments and adhyas, weapons and auspicious objects that deity hold in their hand, and how they seated. These all were considered. And these all were shown in the sculptures. Historian tried to understand the story and the meaning of the sculptures, and to understand that, they started now finding the stories behind them with the help of the Puranas, which was compiled by the Brahmins. And they were mainly written in a simple Sanskrit verses, and which were meant to be read loudly to everybody, including women and Sudras who did not have access to the Vedic learning. So this is how we see, children, the Puranic Hinduism started growing up. Now we discuss about the different stupas. Same way, around the same time that stupas at Sanchis were becoming famous and they were building stupas, at the same time we also have seen that first temple of the house image of God and goddesses were also built. The early temple was just a small square room that is called Garbha Griha, that with a single doorway for the worshipper to enter and offer worship to image. And slowly and gradually the structure became tall, and they started having shikhara, and was built with the central shrine. Temple walls were now started decorating with sculptures, and later temple became far more elaborate. Now temple started having assembly halls, huge walls, gateway, arrangement for the water supply. So this is how we have seen different temples were built at different times. So this temple in Deoghar, Uttar Pradesh, was built in 5th century. Shikhara, the tall structure, we said Shikhara. And one of the unique feature of the temple in the earlier time was some temples were hollowed out of a huge rock as an artificial cave. And the tradition of the artificial cave was very old, and even in the 3rd century CE, this cave temple was built here in Barabara in Bihar. This is the entrance gate of this, and it is believed this was built in the 3rd century BCE on the order of Ashoka for the renouncer who belonged to Ajivika sect. So another important temple is, children, of Kailashanatha temple at Ellora in Maharashtra. So this is how they started making temple from the cave, and that also from a single piece of rock. So next we are going to see that different sculptures which were found in the temples and in the stupas, historians started trying to understand that. And when first the scholars they found these sculptures of god and goddesses, they could not understand what these were, why they were built. So some sculptures they were horrified to see, because in some sculptures they have seen figures with multiple arms, heads, and with combination of human and animal form, so they could not understand. So scholars started studying with this, and the first way to study sculpture was, and early scholars tried to understand this strange things, comparing them with the sculptures which they were familiar with, that from ancient Greek. So they started comparing with the ancient Greek sculptures to understand the sculptures which they have found here. And while doing so, they found that the Indian sculptures, earlier Indian sculptures, were inferior to the work of Greek artists. They found Indian sculptures, earlier Indian sculptures, to be inferior. But these were more often found in, but the sculptures found in the northwestern places like Taxila, and another place is your Peshawar, where Indo-Greek rulers had established kingdom in the 2nd century BC. These images were very nicely made. So this became the best example of the early Indian art. So this is how historians tried to understand the sculptures. First way is by comparing with the familiar ancient Greek style. And another way to understand the sculptures, historian used the textual tradition to understand the images in sculptures. So one such example is about the famous sculptures along a huge rock surface in Mahabalipuram in Tamil Nadu. So in this, historian try to understand these sculptures, and here they have a different interpretation. Some feel that this depict the descent of Ganga. So they think that this is the descent of Ganga from the heaven. The natural cleft, this natural cleft through the center of the rock surface might represent the river. So some think like this. This is the representative of river Ganga. And others feel that this is from Mahabharat, and they think that Arjun doing penance. Here you see this image out here, children. Arjun doing penance on the river bank in order to acquire alms. So this is how we have seen that different interpretation has been put forward for this sculpture in Tamil Nadu. So children, we have seen in this chapter how there was the development of Buddhism, and along with the Buddhism we also talked about the new group of Buddhists, that is your Mahayana. Earlier group was Hinyan, and we talked about the Puranic tradition where the worship of Shiva and Vishnu became quite popular. And in this Puranic tradition they also started talking about God with the different incarnation, and different sculptures we have talked about which were found in temples and in stupas, and historians try to understand these sculptures either by comparing with the ancient Greek sculptures or by understanding from the textual tradition.